Welcome to Quiet Historian, where we close our eyes, listen, and fall asleep to quiet history. I'm your narrator for the night, equal parts history nerd and pillow enthusiast. The goal is modest. Learn a little, laugh a little, and let your brain wander softly towards sleep. Tonight, we're traveling far back, not to palaces or marble temples, but to an age when gods still argued in thunder and mortals learned to dream. You're about to drift through the vast story of Greek mythology, from the first breath of chaos to the birth of Olympus and the faint echo of legends that still hum beneath our modern world. You'll meet heroes carved from courage, lovers who challenged destiny, and creatures that rose from sea foam, starlight, and stubborn hope. Before we begin, if you truly enjoy these stories, hitting like or subscribe helps me keep making them, and hopefully helps you keep drifting off. Let me know where you're listening from tonight. I'm always amazed by the places people tune in. Now, get comfortable, take a slow breath in, and let it out. Because once this story begins, chances are you'll be asleep before it ends. In the beginning, there was no Olympus, no earth, no sea, no sky. There was only chaos. And chaos was not the kind of chaos modern tongues describe, not disorder or frenzy or confusion. It was older than language itself. Chaos was a yawning void, a gaping nothingness without form or direction. It was not evil, nor good, nor even neutral. It simply was. From that ancient nothing came the first stirrings of existence. Gaia, the earth, vast and unshaking. Tartarus, the abyss beneath the earth, dark and dreadful. And Eros, the force of love and desire, the binding agent of all future things. From their meeting, the world began to take shape. The earth lifted her shoulders into mountains and let her hair fall into rivers. The sky arched above her, glittering with the first hints of stars. Between them stretched the first breath of distance, space wide enough for life. From their union came children, vast and powerful, the Titans, 12 in all, beings of elemental might and endurance. Alongside them appeared the Cyclopes, one-eyed craftsmen whose gaze burned like the sun, and the Hecatoncheires, giants with 100 arms and 50 heads who could shake the world merely by moving. Yet Uranus looked upon his offspring and saw not wonders, but threats. Fearing they might one day challenge him, he forced them back into the depths of Gaia's body, imprisoning them beneath layers of rock and soil. The earth groaned with pain, mountains buckled, rivers fled their courses. Her sorrow echoed through every root and cavern until it hardened into anger. From her own iron heart she forged a sickle, its blade curved and gleaming, and called to her youngest Titan, Cronus. He was clever and ambitious, the one who listened when she whispered. That change begins only when someone dares to cut the world open. Gaia hid him among the shadows and waited for Uranus to descend once more. When the sky came down to rest upon the earth, Cronus struck. The heavens split apart with a cry. From Uranus's wound poured blood and foam, seeding the seas and soil with strange new life. From those crimson drops were born the Furies, spirits of vengeance, the giants, embodiments of wrath, and from the sea foam itself, Aphrodite, radiant with the beauty of creation's pain. Uranus retreated, broken, and the rule of the cosmos passed to Cronus. He freed his siblings and crowned himself king of the Titans. The earth sighed in relief, and the world, for the first time, seemed to breathe easily. Under Cronus, the rivers learned their paths. The sun rose and set in rhythm. The seasons began their slow and endless dance. The Greeks would later remember this as the Golden Age, a time when humans lived close to the divine, when hunger and greed had not yet found their names, and when the air itself seemed to hum with peace. But peace contains the seed of its own undoing. An oracle whispered that just as Cronus had overthrown his father, so too would one of his children rise against him. Fear entered the heart of the Titan king, and fear, as always, gave birth to cruelty. Whenever his wife Rhea brought a child into the world, Cronus swallowed the newborn whole, believing that by consuming his heirs, he could consume his fate. One by one, the children vanished into his stomach: Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, and Poseidon. Each devoured before its first cry had faded. When Rhea conceived a sixth child, despair turned her clever. She fled to the island of Crete and gave birth in secret. The child was Zeus, small and crying, but crowned already with the scent of storm. To save him, Rhea swaddled a stone in cloth and handed it to Cronus, who, blinded by habit, swallowed it without question. Then she hid her son in a cave high upon Mount Ida, where nymphs fed him with honey and the milk of the divine goat Amalthea. To conceal his cries, guardians called the curiosities clashed their shields and spears, turning his infant wails into the first thunder of legend. Years passed. Zeus grew into strength and cunning, learning compassion from his mother's pain and rebellion from his father's tyranny. When he came of age, he returned in disguise to the court of Cronus, serving the old king as cupbearer. In the golden cup, he offered not wine, but a potion brewed by Gaia herself, a draught that would loosen the Titan's hold on his devoured children. The moment Cronus drank, the earth trembled. One by one, the swallowed gods came forth again, fully grown and blazing with divine fury. Hera, Poseidon, Hades, Demeter, and Hestia stood beside their brother Zeus, united for the first time since their birth. The war that followed, the Titanomachy, lasted 10 years. It tore the heavens and the earth alike. The Titans fought from Mount Othrys, wielding boulders the size of mountains. The Olympians, led by Zeus, answered from Mount Olympus, their thunderbolts splitting the clouds like veins of fire. Gaia, weary of endless conflict, urged Zeus to seek allies among the imprisoned Cyclopes. He freed them from Tartarus, and in gratitude they forged weapons for the new gods: thunderbolts for Zeus, a trident for Poseidon, and a helm of invisibility for Hades. With these gifts, the balance shifted. The Olympians struck with the precision of lightning, and one by one the Titans fell. When the battle ended, the air itself seemed scorched. Cronus and his allies were cast into Tartarus, a pit deeper than any mortal could imagine, walled in bronze and guarded by monstrous sentinels. The heavens belong now to a new order. Zeus divided the world among his brothers, sky for himself, sea for Poseidon, underworld for Hades, while the earth remained the common ground of gods and men. The reign of the Titans was over. The age of Olympus had begun. Yet even in victory, the pattern of rebellion remained. Gaia, who had seen her sons and grandsons repeat the same violence again and again, understood that power always breeds its next challenger. She watched as the new gods built their palaces of cloud and marble high above the mortal world. Olympus rose gleaming, its halls ringing with laughter, debate, and thunder. From there, Zeus ruled not as a tyrant, but as a lawgiver, striving to balance justice with fear, yet forever aware that the same fate might one day come for him. Below, the earth was still young, still soft from the heat of its making. Seas cooled, forests spread, animals moved through the valleys, and the winds began to carry seeds and songs alike. But Zeus looked down and saw something missing. The world was beautiful, but empty of understanding. He called for Prometheus, the Titan who had sided with the gods, and spoke to him of an idea. "Shape something that can wonder," he said, "something that can remember." Prometheus knelt beside a river and mixed clay with his own tears. From that mixture he formed humankind, fragile, upright, curious. Into them he breathed a spark stolen from the sun. The flame caught, and with it came knowledge, fear, and the beginning of all stories. Thus ended the first chapter of existence, from chaos to order, from formlessness to thought. The Greeks believed that this cycle, birth, overthrow, renewal, mirrored the rhythm of life itself. Every dawn, every season, every revolution of power was the cosmos remembering its own origin. To them, the myth was not fantasy, but mirror, a way of understanding why the world changes, why children defy their parents, and why even gods must learn humility. And as the night of history settled over the world, the voice of the storyteller would soften, for in that quiet, listeners could almost hear the breath of chaos again, waiting, patient, ready to begin the story once more. The reign of the Titans. The war was over. Cronus sat upon his throne, the sickle of his rebellion now a symbol rather than a weapon. The air itself seemed to loosen. For the first time since the heavens had been torn apart, the world exhaled. The Titans, newly freed from the tyranny of Uranus, moved across the land like sculptors shaping a fresh block of marble. They named the mountains, filled the seas with light, and taught the winds to wander. The cosmos, still tender from birth, became their workshop. Cronus ruled from the highest peak of Mount Othrys, a mountain so tall it brushed the veil of clouds. At his side sat Rhea, his queen, whose patience and warmth steadied his restless mind. Beneath them stretched the Golden Age, a time when the world pulsed with the steady heartbeat of harmony. There were no wars, no winters, no need for labor. The earth gave fruit unasked, rivers ran clean, and humankind, those early, clay-born figures Prometheus had shaped, walked without fear. They had no homes because the world itself sheltered them, no weapons because nothing hunted them, no kings because they had no reason to obey. The poets would later say that in those days people lived like gods. Death was gentle, more like a quiet drifting away than an ending. Even time seemed to hesitate, unwilling to disturb such stillness. Cronus looked upon his creation and felt pride, though beneath that pride flickered a single thread of unease. His mother's warning had been clear. Every reign ends as it begins, with an act of defiance. He had slain his father to seize this peace. Perhaps one day his own son would do the same. The thought came and went like a shadow across the sun, but it never vanished completely. Around him, the Titans ruled their domains with vast, patient authority. Oceanus circled the world in his endless river, the boundary between all that was known and the restless dark beyond. Hyperion drove the chariot of the sun each day across the sky, his golden steeds scattering dawn. Thea polished the stars until they shone like the eyes of children. Coeus guarded the poles of heaven, while his wife Phoebe whispered secrets to the moon. Each Titan worked not from ambition, but from instinct, to maintain the rhythm Cronus had established, the music of order after the chaos of creation. Yet even in a golden world, cracks form. Mortals, born of earth and divine breath, began to dream. At first their dreams were harmless, visions of light, of flight, of endless summer. But then came questions. Why should the fruit fall when it pleases and not when we choose? Why should we live forever in the shadow of those above us? Prometheus watched these stirrings with sympathy. He loved humankind as the potter loves his clay, and he saw in them a spark the Titans ignored. When they shivered in the cool nights, he stole fire from the chariot of the sun and carried it down to them in a hollow fennel stalk. The blaze leapt and danced, filling the darkness with warmth and defiance. Cronus awoke to see the first smoke rising from mortal valleys. The sight disturbed him. Fire was knowledge. Knowledge was change. And change was the one thing his rule couldn't bear. He summoned Prometheus to answer for this theft. The Titan bowed but did not kneel. They will need it, he said quietly. Without fire they will never build, and without building they will never remember. Cronus dismissed him, but the words lingered. The king of the Titans had freed the world from one form of fear, only to replace it with another, the fear of losing what he had made. Rhea saw it happening before he did. The man who had once struck down the heavens now paced his halls, suspicious of every whisper. At night, he dreamed of a hand, small, familiar, lifting the sickle against him. When his first child was born, he held her only a moment before swallowing her whole. The horror of it spread through the Titan court like a cold wind. Yet none dared speak. Rhea wept in silence as one by one her children vanished. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, all consumed by the hunger of prophecy. Outside those high halls, the golden age began to fade. The earth, still generous, grew tired. The trees no longer bent so easily beneath their fruit. The rains hesitated. Humans learned toil and sweat, discovering for the first time what it meant to struggle. They built homes and fires, not out of luxury, but necessity. Prometheus visited them often, teaching the secrets of metal and measure, of healing and song. The gods will not thank you for this, warned his brother Epimetheus. Prometheus only smiled. Then let men thank me instead. In the Titan courts, the gossip of the fates grew louder. There were three ancient sisters, Clotho, who spun the thread of life, Lachesis, who measured it, and Atropos, who cut it when the time was due. They visited Cronus in his dreams, speaking in riddles that turned to echoes by morning. The one you devour will be your salvation, they murmured. The one you spare will be your end. He woke in panic, clutching his chest as if to hold the prophecy inside. He ordered the fates banished from Othrys, but their laughter followed him like the ticking of an unseen clock. Still, for mortals below, the legends of that age glowed softly. The Titans were vast, but not yet cruel. They taught humans the names of the stars, the shapes of constellations that guided them across the seas. Atlas, strong and solemn, held up the sky itself, a bridge between divine and earthly realms. Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, gave speech to humankind so they might remember the past and retell it. From her would descend the muses, those bright voices that carried song and poetry into later ages. Even as Cronus's heart hardened, the gifts of his kin rippled outward like light through water. But the heart of the golden age was already dying. When Rhea gave birth to her sixth child, she could no longer bear the slaughter. Guided by Gaia, she fled to Crete and gave birth in secret to Zeus. The story would one day belong to him, but in that moment, the rebellion was still only a heartbeat in his mother's arms. Rhea left her infant to be nursed by the divine goat Amalthea and returned to Othrys with a stone wrapped in cloth. Cronus swallowed it, believing he had devoured his fate. Yet somewhere far away, thunder rolled for the first time, faint but certain. Years passed in uneasy quiet. The mortals grew more self-reliant, the gods more watchful. Cronus ruled, but his paranoia deepened. Rhea endured beside him, her love replaced by endurance. She dreamed often of her hidden son, how he might look, how he might speak. And in those dreams, she began to hope again. When she met secretly with Gaia, the Earth Mother smiled and told her, "All sons are their father's answers, but some questions end the world." The fates waited. The seasons, once endless summer, learned to turn. Autumn brought rest, winter sleep, spring rebirth. Humanity aged alongside the gods. The children of the Golden Age grew humble. Their descendants became mortals in truth, brief, uncertain, but capable of wonder. The poets later said that this was the price of progress, knowledge and mortality, arriving hand in hand. By the time Zeus had grown to manhood, the reign of Cronus was already a relic, shining but brittle. The Titans had shaped the world but could not change themselves. They were permanence given form, and permanence cannot survive curiosity. In the valleys below, humans lit fires, forged tools, and began to name the powers above them. They offered the first sacrifices, not out of fear, but gratitude. The scent of burning grain rose to Olympus and Othrys alike, and even Cronus paused to breathe it in. Somewhere within him, a memory stirred of the days when the world was new, and he himself had been the rebel. When Zeus returned at last, disguised as a servant, the halls of Othrys had grown quiet. The laughter of the Titans had dimmed to murmurs. Their music, once joyous, echoed with age. Cronus did not recognize the stranger who poured his wine, but Rhea did. She said nothing. For months, Zeus watched and waited, learning his father's habits, his fears, his silences. He spoke little, though his eyes carried the calm of the sky before a storm. The moment of reckoning came, not with swords, but with a cup. Zeus lifted the golden chalice to his father and offered a toast to peace everlasting. Cronus drank deeply, unaware of the potion laced within. His face twisted, his body convulsed. From his mouth erupted a cry so deep it split the mountain. Out poured the children he had swallowed. Hestia, Demeter, Hera, Hades, Poseidon, reborn and blazing. The halls shook, the Titans scattered. Cronus fell to his knees, realizing too late that the prophecy he had feared was the same prophecy fulfilling itself. The rebellion of the gods had begun, though the full storm still lay ahead. For a moment, time seemed to hold its breath between generations, the old world fading, the new one waiting to be named. Above them, the stars that Thea had polished so long ago flickered as if watching the next chapter unfold. The Golden Age was over, yet in every legend that followed, its echo remained. the memory of a world without sorrow, when the earth gave freely, and even the gods believed peace could last forever. The Greeks told this not as nostalgia, but as warning perfection invites change, and every paradise must one day pay for its innocence. The rise of Zeus and the war of the gods. When the cry of Kronos faded into the hollows of Mount Othrys, a new sound filled the world, the first breath of the younger gods. They stood blinking in the ashen light of their father's downfall, uncertain whether they were children or conquerors. The walls still trembled from the force of their release. The smell of iron and storm clung to the air. Rhea, who had watched in silence for so long, fell to her knees as her sons and daughters gathered around her. Zeus, the youngest and now the leader by necessity, lifted her gently and said that the age of fear was over. But below the mountain, in the deep black vaults of Tartarus, Kronos' brothers and allies were already stirring, their roars echoing like distant earthquakes. The victory that freed the Olympians had also awakened their enemies. The Titans were not gone, only wounded, and the cosmos had no ruler strong enough yet to command obedience. Zeus looked at his brothers, Poseidon with his calm blue stare, Hades with his quiet and measured thoughts, and told them the truth. The war was not finished. The world had shifted from one set of hands to another, and the struggle to hold it had just begun. At first, the younger gods tried diplomacy. They sent Hermes, still young and swift, to the old Titans who had not fought. Oceanus, Themis, Mnemosyne, asking them to stand aside or lend counsel. Oceanus refused to take sides, claiming the sea served all rulers. Themis, goddess of law, said she would follow the one who could restore balance. Mnemosyne merely whispered that victory without memory is only another kind of loss. Zeus took their words seriously. He was not yet the thunder-wielding king of later myths. He was still learning that power was not enough without order. The Titans who remained loyal to Kronos were many: Iapetus, Crius, Hyperion, and the great Atlas, who bore shoulders broad enough to hold the heavens themselves. They gathered their armies of ancient spirits and elementals and swore to reclaim the throne. Kronos himself, weakened but unbroken, stood among them. The sickle he had once used to overthrow Uranus hung now at his side, its blade dulled, but its memory sharp. The war that followed would be called the Titanomachy, the battle of the gods, and it would last 10 years. In those years, the sky forgot its color. Mountains burned from the friction of endless storms. The earth split, swallowed, and remade itself. From Mount Othrys, the Titans hurled boulders the size of cities. From Olympus, the gods answered with bolts of white fire. Rivers boiled. Forests turned to glass beneath the heat of lightning. Mortals, still new to the world, hid in caves and tried to understand what kind of birth required so much pain. Each side possessed strength, but the Titans had age and endurance. For 9 years, the war stayed even. Day by day, The sky shook, and night by night, the stars blinked out under clouds of ash. Zeus fought at the front, his hands blistered from thunder, his voice hoarse from shouting the names of those who fell. Poseidon shattered mountains with the swing of his trident, raising walls of seawater to drown entire valleys. Hades opened rifts that swallowed enemy battalions whole, yet no victory held. The Titans were vast, their skin like stone, their blood glowing with the first fire of creation. Every wound they suffered seemed to heal by dawn. Desperate, Zeus climbed the peak of Olympus and called out to Gaia. "Grandmother," he said, "the world breaks beneath our struggle. Tell me how to end it." Gaia, weary of centuries of war between her sons and grandsons, answered from the soil itself. She told him of the Cyclopes and the 100-handed ones, creatures whom Uranus had buried deep in Tartarus out of fear. "Free them," she said, "and the balance will shift." So Zeus descended into darkness. The path to Tartarus lay through caverns that moaned like the throats of sleeping beasts. Rivers of fire coiled through the stone. At the gate stood the dragon Campe, guardian of the pit, her tail coiled around 1,000 skulls. Zeus raised his thunderbolt, newly forged but untested, and struck. Light split the underworld. Campe fell, and her chains melted. Inside, the Cyclopes lifted their single eyes, blinking against the brilliance. The 100-handed ones stirred, their voices deep as earthquakes. Zeus spoke carefully. "I will not bind you. I ask your help to end what our fathers began." The Cyclopes nodded. They had forged the weapons of the gods once before, and would do so again. For Zeus they shaped thunder and lightning into a spear of light. For Poseidon they tempered the trident, the weapon that could split both sea and sky. For Hades they cast the helm of invisibility, woven from the shadows of Tartarus itself. The 100-handed ones promised their strength in battle, 3 brothers each with 50 heads and 100 arms, enough to crush mountains into dust. When Zeus returned to Olympus with these allies, the tide of war turned. The younger gods struck with precision, not rage. Zeus hurled his bolts, Poseidon commanded floods. Hades cloaked their armies in shadow until the Titans no longer knew where to aim. The 100-handed ones hurled stones that blotted out the sun. Atlas caught one and threw it back, shattering a mountain in half, but he could not stop them all. One by one, the Titans fell. Hyperion was cast into a fiery sea. Iapetus was bound in chains of wind. Crius sank into the depths where no light reaches. Cronus fought last. Their final battle took place not on earth or sky, but in the in-between. A storm so vast, it seemed to erase the borders of creation. Cronus raised his sickle. Zeus met it with lightning. For a moment, time itself faltered, unsure which of them should rule its rhythm. Then the blade shattered. Cronus fell, and the thunder echoed for 9 days before silence returned. When the dust cleared, the world was scarred but alive. The Titans who had resisted were thrown back into Tartarus, their prison sealed by walls of bronze and guarded by the 100-handed ones. Atlas was condemned to hold the heavens apart from the earth, so that sky and soil would never again unite in rebellion. The younger gods stood atop Olympus, victorious but shaken. The war had given them the world, but it had also shown them what power costs. Zeus divided authority among his brothers. To Poseidon he gave the sea, to Hades the underworld, and for himself he claimed the sky. The earth, as always, belonged to none entirely. It remained the domain of mortals and seasons, of growth and decay. The new order felt lighter, less oppressive, but Gaia sighed, knowing that the same pattern still beat beneath it. Power would rise, waver, and fall, as it always had. The Olympians began to build. On the heights of Olympus, they carved palaces of white stone that glowed like dawn. The air smelled of rain and ozone. Streams of nectar ran down the slopes like waterfalls. From this mountain, they would watch the world and govern its balance. Hermes would carry their messages. Artemis would guard the wilds. Apollo would drive the sun. And Athena, born later from Zeus's own mind, would shape wisdom from the ashes of war. But for now, peace returned, tentative and clean. Below, the mortals who had survived the chaos emerged into sunlight. They found the fields fertile again, the rivers calm. They built temples, not because the gods demanded worship, but because humans needed remembrance. They prayed not for gifts, but for stability, asking that the earth remain still and the sky predictable. The Titans had been eternal. The Olympians would be personal. For the first time, divinity had faces that smiled, argued, and listened. Yet Zeus knew peace would not last forever. Power invites envy, and envy breeds rebellion. He had seen it in his father and grandfather. He knew it would come again. So he established the laws of heaven, the cycles of day and night, of season and tide, of life and death. He swore that even gods must honor the order they served. The thunderbolt became both weapon and warning. The memory of the war lingered, however, woven into every storm. When lightning cracked, the sky mortals said it was Zeus remembering the day he broke his father's blade. When thunder rolled across the mountains, they said it was Cronus answering from the depths. His rage turned to echo. The Greeks did not see this as superstition. To them, memory itself was divine. Every flash of light, every tremor of the ground was the universe rehearsing its own story. In the aftermath of the war, the Olympians visited Tartarus to look upon what remained. The prison was endless, its gates of adamant guarded by the 100-handed ones, who stood like living mountains. Inside, the Titans lay chained in silence, their eyes dim. Even in defeat, they retained a terrible majesty. Zeus looked upon Cronus and hesitated. The old king met his gaze without hatred. "You have done what I did," Cronus said. "You will be done to, in turn." Zeus nodded, neither denying nor accepting the prophecy. He knew the truth of it. Every child carries a fragment of rebellion in their blood. When he left the underworld, the air above felt lighter. The seasons began to turn again. Rain washed the ash from the hills. The first rainbow stretched across the sky, a bridge between storm and calm. And Iris, messenger of peace, took it as her path. For the gods, it was a sign that the cosmos was healing. Zeus gathered his siblings on Olympus. He reminded them that their strength came not from conquest, but from unity. "We were born from fear," he said. "Let us rule from understanding." They agreed, though each interpreted his words in their own way. Poseidon returned to his seas, Hades to his depths. Hera began to shape the order of marriage and family. Demeter turned her grief into the first harvest. The reign of the Olympians had begun, but beneath their triumph lay a quiet truth. The war of the gods had not ended the cycle of chaos. It had simply given it a new form. Every storm, every uprising, every mortal rebellion would echo that first divine conflict. Yet for now, the world rested. The scars on the land became rivers, the craters became valleys, and from those wounds, life began again. The Greeks would later tell that story to remind themselves that even destruction serves creation. From the fall of one generation comes the foundation of the next. The reign of Zeus was not perfection, but it was balance, a fragile piece held together by memory and lightning. And as night returned to the mountain, the sound of thunder drifted like a lullaby over the sleeping world, a reminder that even gods dream of quiet. Olympus Ascendant. The storms had ended. The sky above the world shone clean and blue, washed by lightning and ash. The scars of the Titan War still marked the valleys and cliffs, but grass already pushed through the cracks. Rivers found new beds, curling like silver threads across a landscape reborn. The world, which had survived so many fathers and sons, finally stood still long enough to breathe. From the highest summit, the new gods looked down. Olympus was no longer only a mountain. It was a kingdom of air and light. Columns of marble rose where thunder once fell. Halls gleamed with the reflection of dawn. Here the younger gods began to define themselves, each searching for purpose now that conquest was done. Zeus ruled the heights, his throne carved from cloud stone, a crown of gold burning faintly on his brow. At his side sat Hera, regal and watchful, learning already the power of patience. Below them, their siblings found places suited to their natures. Poseidon shaped his domain of salt and current. Hades withdrew into the deep underworld, his voice soft but absolute. Hestia tended the hearth at the center of Olympus, where every flame that would ever warm a mortal home was first lit. Zeus wanted order, not tyranny. He called the gods to council beneath the open sky and spoke of balance. The world had been remade, and so must its laws. No longer would the heavens be ruled by one alone. Each power must serve a purpose, each gift be weighed against its consequence. The Titans had fallen because they clung to permanence. The Olympians would endure by motion, by the rhythm of change. The council agreed, and the first divine laws were written in thunder and wind. To mortals below, these laws were invisible yet felt. Day followed night with perfect certainty. The seasons began their measured wheel: seed, blossom, harvest, sleep. Rivers remembered their paths. The sea kept its tides. Humanity, fragile but quick to learn, flourished under this rhythm. They built villages along riverbanks, tamed fire, shaped bronze, sang to the sunrise. They did not yet call their gods by name, but they felt their presence in every breeze and heartbeat. Prometheus watched them from afar. He had fought beside the younger gods, yet remained apart, more teacher than soldier. His sympathy for humankind had not faded during the war. If anything, victory made him restless. The new order was bright, yes, but it was distant. The Olympians spoke often of justice and balance, but they looked downward with the gaze of rulers, not companions. Prometheus believed the gulf between heaven and earth should be bridged, not widened. So he descended again, walking among mortals in the guise of a wanderer. He taught them the use of fire, the art of smelting ore, the secret of numbers and constellations. He showed them how to write their memories on clay and mark the passage of the moon. Zeus saw all this and at first said nothing. The king of the gods admired cleverness, but he feared the speed of it. He had built a stable world. Prometheus was teaching it to question. Hera warned him that gratitude in mortals is short-lived. Give them fire, she said, and one day they will imagine they deserve the sun. But Zeus hesitated. He remembered the prophecy of Cronus, the cycle that never ends, and wondered whether knowledge itself was the next rebellion. The mortals, meanwhile, thrived. They built cities and altars, sculpting statues of the gods they could not fully picture. Smoke from their offerings rose in thin spirals, tracing prayers into the sky. At first, those prayers were simple: thanks for rain, safety from flood, luck in childbirth. But soon they grew bold. Requests for victory, for beauty, for more years than fate allowed. The Olympians listened with curiosity, sometimes amusement, sometimes irritation. Hera delighted in the ceremonies of marriage and fidelity, Demeter in the hymns sung during harvest. Poseidon demanded offerings of horses drowned in the sea. Hades accepted silence as his tribute. And Zeus, though flattered, began to feel the pull of responsibility heavier than the crown he wore. It was then that Prometheus crossed a line even Zeus could not ignore. Seeing that mortals suffered from illness and cold, he stole again, this time not fire, but the divine spark of foresight. He gave them medicine and the skill to read omens in the flight of birds, to predict weather and prepare for famine. With these gifts, humanity grew daring. They spoke of shaping their own fate, rather than waiting for the gods to decree it. When Zeus heard their boasting, thunder rolled across Olympus. "They forget who gave them breath," he said, his voice like distant surf. Hera agreed. "They forget because he reminds them they can." Prometheus was summoned before the throne. The hall blazed with light. Every god watched. Zeus asked only one question: why? The Titan answered calmly, "Because ignorance is worse than death." The silence that followed felt longer than the war itself. Then Zeus spoke judgment. Prometheus would live, but chained to the edge of the world, his body bound to the rocks of the Caucasus Mountains. Each day an eagle would tear at his liver, and each night it would heal again, until the debt of defiance was paid. The gods fell silent, and even the wind seemed to withdraw. Below, mortals saw storms rage for 9 days and nights. When the skies cleared, the fires still burned in their hearths. They did not know the price of their knowledge, only that the world felt colder without the Titan's presence. Yet they continued to build, to learn, to hope. The punishment of Prometheus became their myth of guilt, a reminder that every gift demands responsibility. Zeus watched the world in the quiet that followed and understood that power could not eliminate disobedience. It could only shape it. So he decided to balance Prometheus's theft with another creation, one that would test humanity's virtues and reveal their weaknesses. He turned to Hephaestus, the smith of the gods, and commanded him to sculpt a being from clay, as Prometheus had once done. The other gods gathered around, each adding something of themselves. Aphrodite gave beauty, Hermes gave curiosity, Athena gave grace and intellect, and Hera, perhaps with irony, gave the gift of patience. When the figure was complete, Zeus breathed life into her and named her Pandora, the all-gifted. Pandora descended to earth carrying a jar, a wedding gift sealed by the gods. Her husband, Epimetheus, the brother of Prometheus, welcomed her warmly despite warnings never to accept gifts from Zeus. For a time, they lived happily, and the world seemed gentle again. But curiosity, that small, divine flame, grew restless within her. One night, she lifted the lid of the jar. From it poured sickness, jealousy, greed, and despair, creatures of vapor and claw that scattered into the world, taking root in every heart. By the time Pandora closed the jar, only one thing remained inside, a fragile, flickering spirit called hope. She kept it, trembling in her hands, and from that day, humanity lived balanced between suffering and resilience. Zeus did not rejoice in their pain, though some poets later said he did. He watched as mortals learned compassion through struggle, courage through loss. Even the gods could not escape the consequences. Hera saw jealousy take shape in her own reflection. Ares discovered rage was not glory. Aphrodite realized that beauty could wound. The Olympians had given Pandora her gifts, and now each faced the shadow of those gifts. Still, Olympus flourished. The Muses were born from Mnemosyne, giving song to memory and reason. Apollo and Artemis, twins of light and hunt, began their paths across sky and forest. Hermes flew between worlds, a trickster and messenger. The world was no longer silent. It hummed with voices, prayers, and stories. Zeus listened from his throne and knew that rule was not simply power, but attention, the willingness to watch without always striking. He had learned from the Titans that domination breeds revolt, and from Prometheus that compassion breeds change. Between the two, he tried to find balance. When the sun set over the new world, the mountain of Olympus glowed gold against the fading sky. The gods gathered in celebration, drinking nectar, laughing, arguing, immortal, but still learning how to live with one another. From the clouds they looked down upon cities lit by firelight, and for a rare moment, gods and mortals mirrored each other. Both species, divine and human, stood at the beginning of something vast and unpredictable. As the stars emerged, Hestia lit the eternal flame at the heart of Olympus. Its glow spread down through the heavens, seen by shepherds and sailors alike. It was the light of civilization, fragile and eternal all at once. Zeus raised his cup and said quietly that the world was finally awake. But even he, God of order, could feel the old rhythm beneath the calm, the pulse of chaos, faint but steady, waiting for its next breath. The children of Olympus. The age of rule had settled, but peace on Olympus never meant stillness. The palace above the clouds rang with laughter and quarrels, with the soft steps of messengers and the hammering of divine craft. From the smoke of the Titan wars, new generations began to rise, each child carrying a fragment of what the gods had learned and a shadow of what they feared. For immortals, parenthood was never gentle. It was prophecy made flesh. Every birth felt like a question the universe had asked them, and that they dared not answer aloud. Athena came first, though her arrival belonged to no mother. One morning, as the sun ignited the horizon, Zeus woke with a pain behind his eyes so sharp it split the sky. The gods gathered in alarm, unsure whether to help or pray. Hephaestus, ever practical, lifted his hammer and struck his father's skull. From the crack of thunder that followed stepped Athena, fully grown, armored, eyes bright with reason. She bowed once to Zeus, then looked around at the astonished court and asked what work there was to do. The moment defined Olympus' wisdom born not from nurture, but from struggle, calm pulled out of chaos. Zeus loved her immediately, In Athena he saw the balance he had sought since his own rebellion, a mind that could guide power rather than chase it. She built the first libraries in the halls of the gods, teaching that memory was the truest form of strength. To mortals, she became a patron of cities and invention, whispering to artisans and soldiers alike. When humans later built Athens, naming it after her, Zeus smiled. Even he admitted that wisdom's kingdom should be her own. Not all divine births were so peaceful. When Hera looked upon Athena, pride twisted with jealousy. If Zeus could bring forth a daughter alone, so could she. And so, without father or flame, she conceived Hephaestus. But her act defied the balance that governed creation. When the child emerged, his leg was twisted, his face marked by the labor of a god born through spite. Hera recoiled. Olympus whispered. In fury and shame, she cast him down from the mountain. He fell for a day and a night, landing in the sea where Thetis and Eurynome nursed him back to health. From that pain he learned art. His hands, denied perfection, found beauty instead. He built forges under volcanoes, anvils that sang with heat, and crafted wonders that would outlast every quarrel among the immortals. When Zeus learned of Hera's rejection, guilt flickered behind his thunder. He welcomed the boy back, giving him a forge on Olympus itself. There Hephaestus built the thrones of the gods, each a reflection of its owner's soul. For Zeus, a seat that shimmered with stormlight. For Hera, a design so precise that even she could not find fault. But Hephaestus's favorite creation was none of these. He shaped a set of delicate chains, invisible yet unbreakable, and hung them where the light met the mist. He called them laughter's trap, a reminder that even gods could be caught by their own pride. It was both a joke and a warning, and none who saw it ever forgot. Then came Apollo and Artemis, twins of silver and gold, born to Leto after she wandered the earth in exile. Hera, still raging at Zeus's infidelities, had forbidden any land to shelter the pregnant goddess. But the floating island of Delos, rootless and kind, allowed her rest. There she gave birth beneath a grove of palms as the stars bent close to watch. Artemis arrived first, silent and fierce, helping her mother deliver her brother. When Apollo followed, light filled the air as if dawn itself had come to stay. The twins grew inseparable, Artemis, the huntress, wild and loyal to solitude, Apollo, the musician, radiant and drawn to harmony. Together they represented what Olympus always sought and never kept the balance between freedom and order. Apollo's voice could soothe storms. When he played his lyre, even the rivers slowed to listen. He taught mortals the art of healing and prophecy, showing that melody and medicine share the same rhythm. Artemis roamed the forest with her band of nymphs, swearing never to marry, guarding the wild places from both gods and men. Yet even she felt pity for humankind. When hunters prayed for luck, she guided their arrows true, but demanded respect for every creature taken. The twins' domain reached across earth and sky, the sun's chariot and the moon's silver path, and through them the world began to move to a steady beat. Ares, god of war, was born soon after, the child of Hera and Zeus, but loved by neither. He embodied what both tried to master: raw violence, ambition without thought. Where Athena planned, Ares lunged. Where she spoke, he shouted. When mortals saw his shadow, kingdoms burned. Yet even war had its necessity. Ares's rage cleared the ground for new beginnings. From his chaos, civilizations learned the cost of pride. He never understood why others despised him. In his eyes, he was honest. He brought nothing but what already lived in the hearts of men. The family of Olympus was a living mirror. Each god revealed some secret of the others. Athena's restraint highlighting Ares's fury, Hephaestus's humility exposing Hera's vanity, Apollo's light casting longer shadows. Their feasts were beautiful and terrible in equal measure. One day, they would drink nectar and praise each other's songs. The next, they would hurl curses that made the mountains ring. For immortals, eternity was not peace, but repetition with memory. They learned slowly, and sometimes not at all. Among mortals, these divine dramas became patterns to imitate. Cities divided their loyalties. Sparta called upon Ares, Athens upon Athena. Islanders prayed to Poseidon, poets to Apollo. Every god's flaw became someone's faith. Zeus looked down and wondered whether Olympus ruled humankind or reflected it. He began to understand that his children were not simply heirs, but archetypes, the very instincts that moved the human heart. The Olympians also began to test their reach. Hermes carried their words into dreams. Aphrodite sowed desire among kings and shepherds alike. Wherever mortals built, the gods followed, invisible but eager. And sometimes the line between divine and human blurred. Zeus himself, restless as the wind, descended often in disguise, sometimes as golden rain, sometimes as a swan, once even as a bull that carried Europa across the sea. From these unions came demigods, heroes who walked the space between earth and heaven. They were the experiment the cosmos had not asked for, but secretly needed. The first of these heroes was Perseus, born of Danae and the Golden Storm. Armed with a blade forged by Hephaestus and a shield polished by Athena, he faced monsters that even the gods feared. When he slew Medusa and lifted her head, the blood that fell to earth birthed Pegasus, the winged horse. It was said that each drop of divine action leaves creation forever changed. Zeus watched his grandson's journey and felt both pride and unease. If heroes could challenge monsters, someday they might challenge gods. On Olympus, whispers began. Athena foresaw the day when mortal thought would rival divine decree. Apollo, peering into his prophecies, saw a future dimly lit by human fire. Even Ares smiled grimly. He knew that war always found its way upward, but Zeus only raised his hand for silence. "The world grows," he said, "and so must we. If mortals are our reflection, let us not fear what we have taught them." His words carried both comfort and warning. The gods understood that creation's truest danger was not rebellion, but imitation. The family expanded further. Hermes' mischievous offspring, Dionysus, born from madness and flame, the Graces and Fates, spinning the fabric of existence. The heavens became crowded with stories. Each god's joy was another's burden. Every act of kindness rippled into unintended consequence. Even the wind seemed alive with gossip. The world had become a stage, and Olympus its restless audience. Despite the turmoil, beauty flourished. Apollo's temples gleamed on mountaintops. Artemis's forests thrived in moonlight. Blacksmith fires glowed beneath the sea where Hephaestus's forges roared. Muses drifted through mortal dreams, teaching poets to turn chaos into song. Every art, every science, every act of courage whispered the same idea. That meaning could exist even under divine unpredictability. Humanity had inherited both heaven's brilliance and its contradictions. Sometimes Zeus would stand alone on the balcony of his palace, looking down through the clouds at the faint glow of human settlements. He listened to their prayers, some grateful, some angry, and thought of Prometheus. The Titan's punishment still endured, but the king of the gods could no longer tell whether the chain was justice or habit. Perhaps compassion and defiance were simply two sides of the same flame. He had learned to temper his lightning, yet he still feared the day another mind might challenge his rule. The sky felt quiet then, but not empty, only waiting. As night settled on Olympus, Athena's voice drifted from the halls where she taught strategy to gods and mortals alike. She spoke of measured action, of wisdom that defends without destroying. Ares scoffed, but listened. Apollo tuned his lyre to the rhythm of her words, turning counsel into music. For a brief moment, the mountain felt whole, every element in harmony. It would not last, but that was the nature of balance. It exists only long enough to remind the world what peace sounds like. The children of Olympus had grown into their power, each embodying a fragment of eternity. Through them, the cosmos became complex, capable of both cruelty and grace. And as mortals gazed upward, seeing their gods in the patterns of stars, they began to tell stories, not of perfection, but of kinship. The divine, they realized, was not far away. It was simply louder, brighter, more enduring. The gods were not strangers. They were reflections of everything human, made immortal by the need to be remembered. Zeus understood this, even if he rarely said it aloud. He had learned that immortality was not the absence of death, but the presence of consequence. Every act echoed forever. Every decision built a myth. the children of Olympus would carry those echoes into ages yet unborn, their triumphs and failings woven into the heart of the world. For the moment, though, the mountains slept beneath the steady hum of the stars, and the heavens, crowded, flawed, alive, dreamed of what creation might still become. The age of heroes begins. The rule of the gods had steadied the world, but the silence that followed victory began to hum with new restlessness. Mount Olympus gleamed above the clouds, serene in appearance, yet below, humanity was changing. The mortals who once trembled at thunder now lifted their faces to it and wondered if they might one day share its power. The gods had shaped them from clay, taught them lore and song, punished them for curiosity, and still they persisted. Each generation of men stood a little taller than the one before. Where once they built shrines out of fear, now they built cities out of pride. Zeus watched this evolution with both admiration and anxiety. The children of the Olympians, those half-divine offspring of unions with mortals, were spreading across the earth. They were stronger than ordinary men, braver, more daring, yet still mortal enough to fail. To Zeus, they were bridges between heaven and earth, proof that the divine spark could survive in fragile flesh. To Hera, they were reminders of betrayal, walking evidence of Zeus's wandering affections. For each demigod born, Olympus shivered with a mix of hope and resentment. It began with Perseus, whose triumphs had already stirred the imagination of mortals. He had faced monsters, outwitted kings, and carried the favor of both Athena and Hermes. From his deeds, men learned that courage could be clever, that wit might serve as sword. After him came others. Theseus, who cleared the roadways of brigands and entered the labyrinth of Crete to slay the Minotaur. Heracles, strongest of all mortals, whose labors would echo longer than the wars of gods themselves. The age of heroes was not ordained by Olympus. It emerged like a melody the gods had not planned to write. Where divine quarrels once shaped mountains, now human ambition began to carve history. The gods watched as mortals built ships, crossed seas, and founded kingdoms without waiting for thunder's permission. And yet, in every bold act, the immortals still felt their own reflection. When a hero raised a spear, Ares felt pride. When he showed mercy, Athena smiled. Every human story became an echo of something older. Heracles was the most dangerous echo of all. Born of Zeus and the mortal Alcmen, his strength was unmatched even in infancy. Hera's jealousy struck early. She sent 2 serpents to his cradle, and the child crushed them before he could speak. As he grew, his feats multiplied. He hunted the Nemean lion, strangled the Hydra, captured the golden hind of Artemis, and cleansed the stables of Argaeus. Each task purified him, yet bound him tighter to Olympus's gaze. Zeus called him his greatest son. Hera called him proof that even gods commit errors they cannot undo. The world changed around his legend, mortals began to measure virtue not by obedience, but by endurance. To suffer nobly became a kind of worship. Temples to Heracles rose beside those of Zeus, and prayers for strength replaced prayers for safety. The line between mortal and divine blurred until even the gods questioned where divinity truly began. Athena favored another hero, Theseus, whose cleverness matched her own. He unified the quarrelsome towns of Attica, turning tribes into a single city, Athens. He was the first mortal to imagine that civilization itself could be heroic. While others fought monsters of flesh, Theseus fought the monsters of chaos, lawlessness, greed, division. In him, Athena saw a reflection of order's triumph over fear. But she also saw the fragility of it. For every city built, another would fall to envy or arrogance. Even wisdom was a kind of gamble. The rise of heroes forced Olympus to confront its own relevance. No longer did mortals need gods to explain thunder or eclipse. They told stories of themselves. Yet, paradoxically, the gods were everywhere in those stories, woven into every cause and curse. When a storm struck a fleet, sailors blamed Poseidon. When a lover's betrayal ended in tragedy, they cursed Aphrodite. The Olympians had become metaphors, living symbols of what mortals could not yet understand within themselves. It was both immortality and exile. Hera's bitterness towards Zeus reached a breaking point. She could no longer destroy his mortal lovers without consequence. The fates had grown weary of rewriting so many lives. Instead, she turned her fury toward their children. She sent madness to Heracles, driving him to kill his own wife and sons. When he awoke and saw the blood on his hands, he begged for death. But prophecy demanded penance, not escape. Thus began his 12 labors, a cycle of suffering that would cleanse him and test the patience of heaven. Each victory cost him more of his humanity, until at last he stood on the border between mortal pain and divine calm. Zeus lifted him to Olympus, granting him immortality, but even there the hero never fully smiled. Strength, he had learned, is not peace. The other gods watched this transformation uneasily. Apollo saw in it the perfection of tragedy, a mortal so tested that his humanity became sacred. Athena saw the proof that virtue survives even divine cruelty. Hera saw only defeat, but humanity saw inspiration. If a man could ascend to heaven by effort, then fate was not a prison. The gods had built the ladder. The heroes began to climb it. Soon, the world filled with their names. Jason and his Argonauts chasing the golden fleece. Atalanta, swiftest of hunters. Bellerophon rising skyward on Pegasus to strike the Chimera. And Orpheus, who descended to Hades itself for love. Each tale stretched the boundary between divine rule and mortal will. Even the underworld seemed to listen when mortals dared to sing against destiny. Zeus realized that the old order, where gods ruled and mortals obeyed, was slipping quietly away. Yet he did not stop it. Perhaps he understood that stories, not thunder, are what keep memory alive. To crush mortal ambition would be to silence the very faith that sustained Olympus. Better to let them dream of greatness, even if those dreams reach too high. Still, the balance wavered. Heroes were beloved, but they also brought chaos. Every act of valor invited jealousy. Every victory birthed hubris. When kings began to claim divine ancestry without earning it, Zeus sent reminders in the shape of storms and monsters. The Sphinx posed her riddles to Thebes. The sea spat forth Scylla and Charybdis to swallow reckless sailors. Yet even these punishments became legends of courage. The more the gods tested humankind, the more human endurance grew. It was during this time that Prometheus's old prophecy began to whisper again through the corridors of Olympus. He had once said that Zeus's downfall would come not from an enemy, but from a child yet unborn, a being of mortal and divine blood who would surpass all gods. Zeus dismissed it publicly, but dreamed of it often. He feared that every new hero might be the one destined to replace him. At times, he considered forbidding all unions between gods and mortals, but even he could not command the heart's curiosity. So he watched instead, half dreading, half hoping, each time a new legend began. The Olympians too grew reflective. Aphrodite mused that love now seemed more powerful among mortals than among gods, for they loved despite time rather than because of it. Hermes admired human cleverness. He claimed that deceit practiced by mortals was more artful than any trick he could manage. Even Hades admitted in a rare conversation with Demeter that mortals gave the underworld meaning. It was their fragility that made eternity bearable. The gods, though eternal, found themselves jealous of the brevity of human life. In the valleys and islands below, poets began to gather these tales, stitching them into song. Each verse made Olympus a little less distant. Heroes were praised not for perfection, but for struggle. Failure became holy. When sailors looked at constellations, they no longer saw only gods, but heroes immortalized in starlight. Perseus with his blade, Orion with his bow, Heracles standing guard beside the Milky Way. The sky itself became a library of human memory. The age of heroes was not without its darkness. For every triumph, there came a cost. Pride invited tragedy. The favor of one god often earned the hatred of another. When mortals forgot humility, Nemesis, the spirit of retribution, followed swiftly behind. She reminded kings that balance must be kept, that even divine blood could not protect against arrogance. Through her, the universe kept its rhythm. Justice, not mercy, was its heartbeat. Toward the end of that age, Heracles stood at the gates of Olympus one last time. He had completed his labors, endured betrayal and madness, and ascended beyond mortal pain. Zeus welcomed him not as son, but as equal. The other gods bowed their heads in acknowledgement. For the first time, an immortal felt earned rather than born. It changed Olympus forever. If a man could rise to the heavens, perhaps the heavens were not as high as they seemed. In the mortal world, peace settled briefly. Cities thrived under new codes of honor. Art and philosophy began to take the place of endless conquest. Athena whispered to thinkers, Apollo to poets. Even Ares, begrudgingly, admitted that courage without cause was wasteful. The gods began to rule less through lightning and more through inspiration. The age of heroes had given birth to something subtler, an age of reflection. But prophecy does not sleep. The fates, who spin and measure and cut the thread of every life, whispered among themselves. The hero's flame would not last forever. Already, in the dreams of poets, the seeds of another cycle stirred. An age of men alone, when the voices of gods would fade into silence. It was far off yet, but Zeus heard it in the wind. Change was the only immortal truth. As night closed over Olympus, the constellations burned like old stories retold. The gods looked down at the world they had shaped, now glowing with its own light. They saw in every hero's tomb a reflection of themselves: pride, love, defiance, and regret. The age of heroes had not replaced the gods, it had explained them. Through mortal eyes, divinity had learned humility. And as the last embers of Heracles' pyre drifted toward the stars, even Zeus felt a strange contentment. For the first time since the dawn of creation, he understood that to be remembered is another kind of eternity. The Trojan War and the twilight of heroes. The wind that once carried the songs of Heracles and Perseus now carried whispers of something darker. The age of shining deeds was ending. Where heroes had once fought monsters, they now turned their weapons upon one another. The gods, who had long treated mortal lives as pieces in a cosmic game, would find that this next contest would consume even them. It began, as so many tragedies do, with pride disguised as beauty. On Olympus, a feast was held to celebrate the wedding of Peleus and Thetis, a union meant to reconcile divine and mortal blood. Every god was invited except one, Eris, spirit of discord. Angered by the slight, she arrived unbidden, tossing into the hall a golden apple inscribed, "To the fairest." The laughter stilled. Aphrodite, Hera, and Athena each reached for it, claiming the title by right of beauty, power, or wisdom. Zeus, unwilling to choose between them, commanded that a mortal should decide. He chose Paris, Prince of Troy, a shepherd known for his fairness and fatal charm. The three goddesses descended to him upon Mount Ida, each offering a gift. Hera promised dominion over empires. Athena promised wisdom and victory in war. Aphrodite offered the love of the most beautiful woman on earth. Paris, dazzled by the promise of desire, placed the apple in Aphrodite's hand. From that simple act, the world began to tilt toward ruin. The goddess of love smiled, knowing her reward would wound both gods and men. The prize she promised was Helen, Queen of Sparta, wife of King Menelaus. When Paris journeyed to Sparta as guest, Aphrodite filled Helen's heart with longing. She fled with him to Troy, leaving behind her husband, her child, and the fragile peace between kingdoms. The Greeks called it abduction. The poets called it destiny. From the moment the sails of Menelaus's fleet unfurled, the gods divided their loyalties. Hera and Athena, slighted by Paris's choice, stood with the Greeks. Aphrodite, protective of her promise, guarded Troy. Zeus claimed neutrality, but watched with weary eyes as pride blossomed into war. Across the Aegean, the call to arms spread like fire. Agamemnon, king of Mycenae and brother to Menelaus, gathered the greatest heroes of Greece. Odysseus of Ithaca, clever and reluctant. Ajax, immense and loyal. Diomedes, fierce and pragmatic. And Achilles, son of the sea nymph Thetis, unmatched in valor and doomed by prophecy. They built 1,000 ships, their sails white as bone, and set out for Troy. The sea itself seemed to hold its breath. For 10 years the war ground on, a cycle of glory and futility. The gods fought by proxy through their chosen champions. When Athena guided a spear, it flew true. When Apollo struck, plagues followed in his wake. Mortals prayed to one god at sunrise and cursed another by nightfall. The battlefield became an altar where blood replaced incense. Homer would one day call it the wrath of men, but it was really the weariness of heaven made visible. Achilles was both the brightest flame and the shortest lived. His mother had dipped him in the river Styx, making his body invulnerable except at the heel she held. He fought not for kings, but for glory, believing that a short life remembered forever was better than a long one forgotten. When Agamemnon seized his prize of honor, a captive woman named Briseis, Achilles withdrew from battle, and the Greek army faltered. Pride clashed with pride. Their quarrel echoed the feuds of Olympus. Even Zeus sighed, saying that men had learned his temper too well. The tide of the war turned when Hector, Prince of Troy and the most noble of its defenders, met Achilles in single combat. Both fought not only for city or kin, but for the meaning of the word hero itself. When Achilles slew Hector and dragged his body behind his chariot, the gods fell silent. No victory tasted sweet in that dust. Later, when old King Priam crept into the Greek camp to beg for his son's body, Achilles wept, seeing in the man his own father's face. He returned the corpse, and for a moment, the world remembered mercy. That night, the gods looked down and understood that mortals were capable of compassion, even they could not match. But fate, once stirred, does not sleep. Paris, guided by Apollo, loosed an arrow that found Achilles' unguarded heel. As he fell, the sound of his armor striking the ground was said to echo all the way to Olympus. The greatest of heroes had died from the smallest flaw, a reminder that perfection invites its own undoing. The Greeks mourned, the Trojans trembled, and the gods looked at one another in silence. The war had become a mirror, showing them what they had always been, immortal beings trapped in human passions. Odysseus, ever the thinker, devised the endgame. He built a hollow wooden horse, left it as a gift, and sailed away with his fleet hidden beyond the horizon. The Trojans, believing the Greeks defeated, brought the horse within their walls. At night its belly opened, and soldiers poured out like fate itself. Troy burned, its towers falling into the sea like stars dying in reverse. The gods watched, powerless to intervene. They had bound themselves by their own rivalries. When dawn came, the smoke rose higher than Olympus. The city that had dared to love against decree was ash, and the age of heroes burned with it. After the war, the victors discovered that triumph carried its own curse. Agamemnon returned home to betrayal and death. Odysseus wandered 10 years more across hostile seas, tested by sirens, storms, and his own cunning. Even the gods began to fade from the edges of mortal vision. They still ruled the sky, but fewer men called their names with reverence. The stories of war had changed them from rulers to characters. And once a god becomes a story, he can never again be entirely real. Zeus understood this before the others. He saw how poets, not priests, now held the power of memory. He watched as mortals told the tales of Troy by firelight, shaping the gods into symbols of love, rage, and justice. He did not try to stop it. Perhaps he was tired. Perhaps he knew that myth is simply the breath of history, still warm. When Hera mocked the vanity of mortals, Zeus replied that eternity itself requires witnesses. Let them remember us, he said, even if they no longer fear us. The younger gods grieved the loss of attention. Apollo's temples emptied. Aphrodite's altars grew quiet. Only Athena thrived, her spirit living on in every city that prized knowledge above conquest. She whispered to craftsmen and philosophers, turning prayer into thought. When mortals reasoned instead of begging, she counted it as worship. The divine, it seemed, was learning to evolve. The Trojan War had not just ended an era, it had rewritten the relationship between heaven and earth. For the first time, mortals had acted without asking permission. They had defied prophecies, broken vows, and still found meaning in the wreckage. The gods had shown them power, and they had replied with will. It was the beginning of a quieter kind of greatness, one measured not in thunder, but in endurance. On Olympus, the mood changed. No more feasts of conquest, no more wagers over human lives. The immortals became contemplative, almost nostalgic. They spoke of the days when prayers came like rain, when every storm had a name. Now, they listened to the faint murmur of poets below, realizing that remembrance was the final offering left to them. They would live forever, yes, but in story, not in sight. As centuries turned, Troy's ruins became sacred ground. Travelers picked through its stones, touching the blackened walls, as if feeling for the pulse of time. They said the earth there still smelled faintly of smoke and salt. Children played at reenacting the battles, their wooden swords tracing shadows of gods long departed. Even silence became holy. The Greeks believed that where great suffering had occurred, truth lingered like a ghost. The Trojan War ended the age of heroes, but not the hunger for meaning. From its ashes rose philosophers, historians, and dreamers who sought reason where once they had sought divine favor. Zeus watched them from his fading throne and did not lament. He had come to understand that divinity survives not by command, but by curiosity. Every question asked beneath the stars was a kind of prayer. And so the gods remained, less visible, more patient, woven into conscience rather than cloud. The wars of men would continue, but never again with Olympus watching so closely. The thunder would still roll, the sea would still rise, but behind those forces there was no longer a face demanding worship, only memory and the faint echo of laughter from a feast long ago when an apple rolled across the floor and changed the world. The twilight of heroes was not a fall, it was a transformation. In surrendering their myths to mortal tongues, the gods achieved the one thing immortality alone could not give them: understanding. They became ideas, enduring in thought, long after temples turned to dust. And as night settled once more over the Aegean, the constellations of Troy, Orion, and Perseus shone like pages of a sky-bound book. Somewhere in that quiet light, the age of myth exhaled its last breath, and the age of memory began. The age of men and the silence of the gods. When the smoke of Troy had drifted into the sea, a quieter dawn began to spread across the Aegean. The air no longer trembled with thunder. The voices that once cracked through clouds grew faint, like echoes sinking into marble. For the first time since the world's birth, the gods withdrew, not in defeat, but in stillness. Olympus did not fall, it simply stopped speaking. Mortals looked upward and found the sky unchanged. The stars still burned, the seasons still turned, and the tides still obeyed the moon. Yet there was a difference they could feel in their bones. Where once every sound carried divine intention, now the world answered only with wind. It was terrifying, and it was liberating. Men began to realize they were alone with their own thoughts. Without the command of Zeus or the prophecies of Apollo, they started to ask questions. Why does lightning strike? What moves the heavens? Why do we love, grow ill, grow old? The age of inquiry was born from the hush that followed Olympus's retreat. The silence was not emptiness, it was invitation. In the cities that rose from the ruins of Mycenae and Troy, a new kind of temple appeared. It was not built for prayer, but for dialogue. In Miletus, Thales watched water ripple against stone and decided that everything, even thought, must have a natural cause. In Samos, Pythagoras heard harmony in the pluck of strings and declared that number itself was divine. Heraclitus of Ephesus stood beside a river and saw change as the only constant. The gods had once ruled with certainty. Men now ruled with wonder. Athena lingered, unseen but present, in every act of reasoning. She had always preferred intellect to worship. When mortals drew geometric lines in sand or mapped the motion of the stars, she listened like a proud teacher who no longer needed to correct her pupils. To her, each theorem was a hymn. Yet not all gods accepted silence. Dionysus roamed the hills disguised among mortals, seeking to keep alive the ecstatic bond between the divine and the human heart. His followers danced through night forests with torches raised, chanting that forgetting oneself was the only true remembrance of eternity. The philosophers called it madness. Dionysus called it memory. The balance between thought and faith shifted, but never broke. For every philosopher tracing logic, there was a poet still whispering myth. Hesiod gathered the old stories and set them down, afraid they would fade like smoke. Homer's verses were recited in every city square, until the gods who had become invisible returned in the rhythm of language. Their temples turned into syllables, their statues into metaphors. Olympus survived in the human voice. Zeus himself withdrew deeper into cloud. He had grown weary of crowns and thunderbolts. From his height, he could see new patterns forming, ships exploring beyond known shores, men carving laws instead of idols, children asking their fathers if the gods were real. He felt no anger. He knew that disbelief was another form of curiosity, and curiosity was kin to creation. The world grew wider. On the plains of Attica, the city of Athens blossomed, radiant and restless. Its people built theaters where tragedy could teach compassion, and assemblies where argument could replace violence. They did not pray for wisdom, they practiced it. Pericles stood before the Parthenon and called it a house not for a god, but for an idea, the ideal of beauty that lifts the human spirit toward the divine. Even the sculptors understood perfection was no longer power, but proportion. In this new light, the myths took on second lives. When artisans painted the birth of Aphrodite, they were not summoning her. They were studying form, motion, grace. When dramatists retold the sufferings of Prometheus, they were not warning against rebellion. They were exploring the price of progress. Myth became mirror. What once explained the universe now explained humanity. The silence of the gods also birthed democracy. When no divine decree could decide right from wrong, men were forced to listen to one another. The assembly became the new oracle. The stones of the agora echoed with debate. What is justice? What is virtue? Socrates walked barefoot among them, asking questions that left even priests speechless. He believed that truth resided in dialogue, that every soul carried its own spark of reason. To Zeus, listening from afar, this sounded suspiciously like divinity reborn. Not all welcomed the change. The old priests muttered that mankind was growing arrogant, that hubris would invite punishment again. They were partly right. The human mind, now free to climb, sometimes forgot humility. Empires rose upon logic and fell to greed. Alexander marched east, believing himself the new Achilles, carrying Homer in one hand and conquest in the other. The gods watched but did not intervene. They had learned that every lesson must be lived, not dictated. In the absence of thunder, men discovered conscience. Where fear of divine wrath had once curbed cruelty, now empathy had to take its place. The philosophers taught that virtue was not obedience, but balance, the golden mean between excess and deficiency. They spoke of moderation, courage, friendship. The new sacred texts were dialogues. The new rituals were acts of citizenship. Even the heavens, once a palace of gods, became a field of study. Anaxagoras dared to say that the sun was a fiery stone, not a chariot. The stars, once thought to be divine eyes, were declared worlds of their own. The gods did not smite him. They only smiled, for knowledge itself had become the newest form of worship. Each discovery was an echo of their ancient curiosity, the same spark that had once led Prometheus to steal fire. Yet, beneath progress, nostalgia lingered. In quiet moments, sailors still poured wine into the sea for Poseidon, and mothers still whispered prayers to Hera for safe childbirth. Belief did not vanish, it softened, becoming personal. The grand chorus of Olympus faded into 1,000 small murmurs carried by daily life. Faith transformed into gratitude. As centuries passed, myths crossed borders. Rome borrowed Greece's gods, renamed them, and built new temples under the same sky. Jupiter for Zeus, Venus for Aphrodite, Mars for Ares. But the old divinity had already changed shape. The Romans worshipped discipline and order more than thunder and passion. The gods had become civic ideals. Loyalty, courage, duty. Their stories served the empire, and through that empire, the Greek imagination reached the edges of the known world. Then came an even deeper silence. Empires crumbled, libraries burned, and new faiths arose, promising salvation beyond Olympus. Yet beneath every altar stone, fragments of the old world remained. In monasteries and scrolls, scholars preserved the verses of Homer, the arguments of Aristotle, the geometry of Euclid. The gods no longer walked among men, but their language had become the foundation of reason itself. In time, philosophers would look back and see that the divine had never vanished. It had diffused. Every law of nature, every spark of insight, every act of compassion carried the same essence once attributed to Olympus. The universe no longer needed rulers, it needed observers. Humanity had inherited the work of the gods. The poets understood this before anyone else. When they wrote of love, they still invoked Aphrodite. When they described the storm, they still used Zeus's name. not out of belief, but out of recognition that myth was a kind of emotional shorthand for truth. The gods had become eternal metaphors, ways of naming the forces within and around us. In that sense, the silence of Olympus was the beginning of a new dialogue. By retreating, the gods had made room for the human voice. The songs of Homer became the psalms of civilization. The same breath that once called thunder now wrote philosophy, composed music, and mapped the stars. What the ancients called divine inspiration became the modern word for genius, a spirit that still descends, unseen, when thought meets imagination. There were moments when the veil between worlds thinned again, an artist sculpting a perfect form, a statesman speaking justice with divine clarity, a lover whispering vows that outlast mortality. In those flashes, the old presence stirred. The Greeks had a word for it, enthusiasmos, the god within. Perhaps that was Olympus's final gift, not dominion, but participation. By the time Rome gave way to its own myths, the Greek gods had fulfilled their purpose. They had guided creation, inspired rebellion, taught consequence, and finally yielded to reason. Their legacy was not temples or rituals, but curiosity itself. To question the world was to honor them. To imagine better worlds was to continue their work. In the modern age, though the word modern would have meant nothing to them, the gods are still everywhere in disguise. They stand in the names of planets, in the stories we tell of heroes and flaws, in the art that seeks balance between beauty and truth. They are not forgotten, they are translated. Each generation rediscovers them beneath new metaphors. As night once more falls over the Mediterranean, the sea glows faintly with the same light that once shone from Olympus. The stars that guided Odysseus still mark the sky. The wind still hums through ruined columns, and travelers still pause, feeling watched, though no eyes remain above. The silence of the gods is not absence, it is trust. They left the world in our hands, confident that the story would continue. And so it has. From chaos to order, from myth to philosophy, from prayer to thought, the line is unbroken. The gods may no longer speak, but the world still answers them, in equations, in poems, in kindness. Their voices became our own. The divine did not die, it evolved into understanding. When dawn touches the Aegean again, the hills of Greece shimmer like old marble waking from a dream. Somewhere above them, in the quiet halls of an unseen Olympus, the gods listen to the hum of human reason and smile. The silence they left behind was never an ending. It was the beginning of everything that would follow. The legacy of light, how Greek myth shaped the modern mind. The silence that followed Olympus was not darkness, it was dawn. The old gods had retreated into story, but their light had not gone out. It shimmered quietly beneath every word, every sculpture, every dream that dared to reach upward. The myths that once explained the thunder and the sea began to explain something even greater, the human condition. Centuries passed, and the world turned its face toward new empires, new faiths, new philosophies. Yet through the shifting centuries, the pulse of Greece remained. The language of Zeus and Athena, of Apollo and Dionysus, had changed dialects, but not rhythm. Wherever human beings sought meaning, beauty, and understanding, the Greek imagination rose again, uninvited but indispensable. When the philosophers of Athens had turned thought into a mirror of the cosmos, they gave the world a method for wonder. That method survived even when the temples fell. The questions once posed to oracles were now whispered in laboratories, classrooms, and studios. What is truth? What is beauty? What is good? The Greeks had not answered these questions. They had taught the world how to ask them. In the centuries after the fall of Rome, the Western world drifted through shadows of forgetfulness. Empires burned, libraries turned to ash, and silence grew heavy again. But deep in monasteries, beneath the chanting of prayers, fragments of Greek thought endured. A monk might copy Aristotle by candlelight without understanding a word of it, yet the act itself was devotion, the preservation of curiosity. In those quiet rooms, the flicker of ancient reason refused to die. Then came the Renaissance, when Europe awoke as if from a long sleep. Artists, poets, and thinkers turned their gaze back to Greece and found in its ruins the anatomy of greatness. Florence, Athens reborn in marble and paint, became the new Olympus. The gods returned not as deities, but as muses. Painters carved Apollo into light and shadow. Sculptors resurrected Venus from stone. Scholars unearthed the geometry of Euclid, the poetics of Homer, the ethics of Aristotle. The Greeks had spoken again, and humanity listened with reverence disguised as discovery. In every studio, the dialogue between myth and reason began anew. Michelangelo's chisel sang hymns older than scripture. His David, poised between tension and serenity, echoed the balance of Apollo and Dionysus, discipline and chaos, intellect and passion. In Raphael's fresco of the School of Athens, Plato points to the heavens, Aristotle to the earth. Between them lies the unbroken thread of Greek thought, the belief that truth lives in harmony, not domination. The Renaissance was not merely a rebirth of art, it was a reunion between the divine and the rational. Science, too, found its lineage in the myths. The Greeks had once mapped the constellations as gods, frozen in story. When Galileo lifted his telescope, he extended that same impulse to understand the heavens by naming them. He found not Zeus's lightning, but Jupiter's moons, not Artemis's silver glow, but the orbits of worlds. Yet the poetry remained. Astronomers still call the planets by their divine names, as if remembering that even in the machinery of the universe, there is mythology. The Enlightenment carried the torch forward. Reason became the new Olympus, and philosophy the new priesthood. Thinkers such as Voltaire and Diderot revered the Greeks not for their temples, but for their courage to question. They saw in Socrates' death a kind of secular martyrdom, the triumph of inquiry over obedience. Know thyself, the Delphic command, became the foundation of modern psychology. Even the word academy, drawn from Plato's grove, became the emblem of learning. Still, the Greeks were not worshipped uncritically. Their myths contained contradictions, their philosophies flaws. But within those imperfections lay something profoundly human, the acceptance that wisdom is never finished. Every generation inherits not certainty, but conversation. The Greeks had taught the world that truth is pursuit, not possession. That idea became the heartbeat of modern thought. As Europe expanded across oceans and continents, carrying its languages and ideals with it, the ghosts of Olympus traveled too. American democracy traced its ancestry to Athenian assemblies. The architecture of Washington echoed the columns of the Parthenon. The very word politics, born from the Greek polis, became the framework of civic life. Even the Olympic Games returned, a reminder that striving and excellence had once been sacred. But it was in art, literature, and psychology that the Greek spirit found its deepest reincarnation. Writers from Dante to Goethe, from Shelley to Joyce, all walked among the ruins of Olympus in their own ways. They borrowed myths like mirrors, using them to reflect new forms of truth. Prometheus became the symbol of science, defying ignorance. Odysseus became the emblem of human perseverance and curiosity. Medusa, once a warning of monstrosity, became a metaphor for misunderstood power. The old stories proved elastic, capable of bending with time without breaking. In the modern age, as religion gave way to rationalism, the Greeks provided a language for the sacred that required no gods. They replaced miracles with metaphors. To speak of Achilles' heel or Pandora's box is to speak Greek without knowing it. Their myths became the grammar of emotion, the shared vocabulary through which humanity still describes its fears, hopes, and contradictions. Even psychology, the study of the mind, carries their imprint. Freud turned to Oedipus to describe desire and guilt. Jung looked to myth as the map of the collective unconscious. Each found in ancient story a reflection of the modern soul. The gods, once external, had migrated inward. The temples were now within. Through all this transformation, the essence of Greek thought endured, the unity of beauty and truth, the dignity of inquiry, the divinity of the human mind. When modern scientists speak of elegance in equations, or philosophers describe ethics as symmetry, they are continuing an aesthetic born under Attic skies. For the Greeks, to think beautifully was to live rightly. That ideal still glimmers in every act of creativity and compassion. The physical traces of Greece may crumble, but the architecture of its ideas remains unshaken. In the marble ruins of the Acropolis, one can still feel geometry at work. the invisible proportions that make stone seem alive. Tourists touch those columns and feel the hum of something older than religion, harmony. It is not superstition that draws them there, but recognition, an unspoken gratitude to the civilization that first made thought itself sacred. Even in technology, the Greek impulse persists. Each innovation, from the printing press to the telescope to the quantum computer, carries within it a spark of Prometheus, the refusal to accept ignorance as destiny. Every discovery that challenges authority, every question that outlives its answer, continues the rebellion begun when mortals first lit a stolen fire. Yet, for all their brilliance, the Greeks were not gods, they were mirrors. They reflected the eternal paradox of being human, fragile yet aspiring, finite yet seeking the infinite. Their myths endure because they never pretended to solve the mystery of existence. Instead, they gave it shape and music. They showed that chaos could become cosmos, that tragedy could coexist with beauty, and that thought itself was a kind of worship. In this sense, the legacy of Greece is not confined to the past. It is a living inheritance, a quiet companion, walking beside every civilization that values imagination and reason. When a poet gazes at the sea and feels awe instead of fear, when a scientist looks at the stars and asks why instead of who, the flame of Olympus flickers again. The light of Greek myth was never meant to blind. It was meant to guide. It taught humanity to see itself not as puppet or sinner, but as participant in the ongoing act of creation. That light traveled through millennia, through parchment and pigment, through ink and circuitry, until it found its home in every mind willing to wonder. And so the gods, who once thundered and wept and fell in love, continue to live quietly in the background hum of thought. They speak in metaphors now, in the curves of architecture, in the rhythm of poetry, in the symmetry of equations. Their immortality is no longer a matter of worship, but of relevance. To think, to create, to question. These are the modern prayers. Somewhere between logic and dream, the spirit of Greece still listens. In the hush between heartbeats, in the pause before inspiration, there is the faint echo of Apollo's lyre and Athena's calm voice asking another question. The myth never truly ended, it only changed form. The gods have become thought itself. And if you stand, even now, beneath the clear night sky, above the ruins of Delphi or the steps of the Parthenon, you can still feel it. The quiet glow of an ancient curiosity, patient as starlight. The world has grown louder, but the light of Greece remains steady, reminding us that every idea, every act of understanding is another way of returning fire to the world. The legacy of Greek myth is not the memory of gods, it is the discovery of ourselves. The eternal fire, why myths still matter today. The gods are quiet now. Yet their stories still breathe through us. Every generation thinks it has left Olympus behind. Every generation rediscovers it in disguise. The myths have not vanished. They have adapted. They move through our art, our science, and our dreams, like hidden rivers feeding the surface of the modern mind. When we speak of heroes and villains, when we chase ambition or wrestle with conscience, we replay the oldest dramas. Achilles becomes the soldier defying orders for morality. Icarus becomes the engineer who flies too high. Pandora becomes the scientist who opens the sealed box of knowledge. Each age renames the same questions. How far can we reach? What price will curiosity demand? The world once looked to the sky for gods. Now it looks to screens and telescopes, but the impulse is the same, to find reflection and meaning beyond ourselves. The myths endure because they describe inner weather, not outer history. Zeus's thunder lives in our tempers. Aphrodite's charm lingers in our longing. Athena's patience steadies our problem solving. They are not relics. They are blueprints of the psyche. Carl Jung saw in myth the map of the collective unconscious. Heroes, shadows, mentors, tricksters. The same cast appearing in every tale ever told. He called them archetypes, the inherited symbols of our emotional DNA. To tell a myth is to remember ourselves. Modern storytellers continue the lineage without knowing it. Filmmakers craft chosen ones, forbidden loves, and falls from grace, Homer, in cinematic form. Superheroes wear the armor of ancient demigods. Science fiction reimagines Mount Olympus as the stars. Humanity still needs gods, but now we project them instead of praying to them. In classrooms, students read the Odyssey and feel its pull. Odysseus is every traveler trying to find home through chaos. His sea is time. His monsters are our distractions. When he lashes himself to the mast to resist the sirens, we recognize our struggle with temptation and attention. Myth survives because it translates the infinite into the familiar. Science, which once dethroned the divine, has become myth's new partner. The Big Bang is a modern genesis. Quantum theory whispers of creation through chance and symmetry. Cosmologists describe the universe in metaphors of birth, death, and rebirth, the same rhythm that pulsed through Hesiod's Theogony. Even physics borrows poetry, strings, waves, fields, uncertainty. The vocabulary of wonder never truly changes. Technology has made myth portable. Stories once told by firelight now glow from the palm of the hand. We scroll through digital epics, feeds of triumph and downfall, envy and adoration. The algorithm is our oracle, predicting desire. Beneath the noise, the ancient hunger persists, to be remembered, to be understood, to belong to something larger than the self. That hunger is why myths matter. They remind us that chaos can be shaped into meaning. They do not promise comfort, they promise continuity. When cities burn or ideals collapse, the stories remain, waiting to rebuild imagination from the rubble. Artists feel this most. Every brushstroke, every melody, every sentence steals a little fire from the gods and passes it forward. Each work of art is rebellion against silence, an echo of Prometheus's theft. Creativity is defiance turned into light. Yet myth shapes the quiet choices of daily life. When someone chooses compassion over revenge, they replay Achilles and Priam. When conscience wins a battle, they echo Orestes, haunted by justice. When they hope against reason, they summon Pandora's last gift, hope itself, small and luminous at the bottom of the box. Even politics moves to mythic rhythm. Nations imagine heroes, betrayals, golden ages, and apocalypses. These are collective myths, sometimes dangerous, sometimes unifying. The Greeks understood. Every myth is both mirror and warning. Education, at its best, is myth retold as method. History warns that hubris brings downfall. Science repeats Prometheus's lesson. Knowledge enlightens, but burns when misused. The classroom, like the temple, turns story into understanding. Some believe myth and reason are opposites. The Greeks would smile at that. They knew imagination and logic are twins. Without myth, reason is dry. Without reason, myth is blind. Together they create wisdom, the balance that built civilization and still sustains it. We see Olympus reflected in our technology. Artificial intelligence, genetic design, virtual reality. Each invention asks the old question of creation. Are we gods now, or children playing with lightning? The ancients would warn that power without humility breeds ruin. Icarus was never punished for flying, only for forgetting the sun's heat. Even our environmental crisis has mythic resonance. Gaia stirs in our consciousness again. The planet becomes character, wounded and vast. To protect it is to speak the language of reverence. The gods return whenever gratitude does. Across the world, myth keeps its pulse. The Norse sagas, the Hindu Vedas, the Dreamtime stories, the epics of Africa and the Americas, all share the same architecture of wonder. Greek mythology endures, not because it was first, but because it was human. It gave form to awe without pretending to control it. That humility is its genius. Neuroscientists now confirm what poets already knew. The brain loves pattern and metaphor. We think in stories because reality alone is too vast to hold. Myths compress infinity into memory. They let heart and mind speak the same language. When we lose myth, we lose meaning. When we rediscover it, the world feels alive again. Mythology returns during crisis. When facts fail, stories restore coherence. After disaster, people rebuild through narrative who we were, what we survived, what we will become. Myth is the emotional scaffolding of civilization. It keeps Prometheus's fire alive when everything else grows cold. The poet Zephyrus once said, "The Greek language has never ceased." He meant the continuity of imagination, the unbroken dialogue between mortality and wonder. To think in myth is to stand between stars and soil and feel that both belong to you. If the gods were to speak again, they would not thunder from clouds. They would whisper through curiosity. They would appear in laboratories, in classrooms, in quiet acts of kindness. They would teach that eternity is not length, but depth. That meaning is the only immortality worth seeking. We are the heirs of Olympus. The myths were rehearsals for humanity. They taught us to question fate, to invent hope, to turn chaos into pattern. Every advance of science, every poem, every act of empathy continues that rehearsal. The divine fire still passes from hand to hand. At night, when the world slows, the old images return. The sea of bronze, the constellations naming heroes, the mountains where gods once whispered to shepherds. They are quiet now, but their silence is full of memory. We hear the hum of electricity and think it mechanical, yet it is the same forge of Hephaestus. Creation still underway. Somewhere unseen, Prometheus smiles. The eagle no longer comes. His fire has multiplied into billions of small flames. Books, songs, discoveries, kindnesses. He does not need worship. He only needs us to keep the fire lit. That is the final truth of mythology. It was never about belief. It was about participation. The gods existed so we could imagine ourselves capable of more. They taught us to see light, not as a gift from heaven, but as a responsibility, to carry it forward, to warm others, to refuse despair. The eternal fire still burns in art studios and observatories, in classrooms and hearts, in every human attempt to understand and to create. It burns quietly, like memory. It burns brightly, like hope. It burns endlessly, because the story is not over. We are the myth now.